Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me for another Iron Age comic review. And we are looking at Isom #1, which has arrived. And I have a lot of thoughts about this. For my new format for these kinds of reviews, I'm going to start off with the product review, where I give you an idea of what I think of the book and its value. And then I'm going to go into the critique part. And the review part is going to be spoiler free. So I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm just going to give you a brief thumbnail of the story and what I thought of it, along with the other usual review elements that I work in. And then I will give you a warning before the break. Then we'll go into a critique where I talk about things in a little more detail, and some things are going to get spoiled. So if you want to avoid spoilers, stop at that break. Okay, let's talk about the product. Starting with, as usual, the form factor. And it is a really nice book. It has a good binding, has a good feel on the hand. It has a nice glossy finish, but not a super glossy finish. As I'm sure I've stated before on this channel, I am not a fan of a big, heavy gloss. I think that it impacts the reading experience to a certain amount. It makes it sometimes hard to see the art clearly, especially under a good, strong light, which you want if you are going to have a good look at the art. And this is a little too glossy for my tastes. It has a very high-end magazine look to it, which I know a lot of people like. I would have preferred a slightly more matte finish to this, but it's fine. I'm not sure how this stacks up against, modern trade paperback. I don't think I've looked at one of those in 5 or 6 years. But it is exactly what I would expect from an indie comic in this sphere. It's very good. If you have seen something from Iconic Comics, if you have seen something from an independent publisher like Narwhal, this is the same level of quality. This is not a step down by any means, and depending on your standards, it may be a step up. The paper is of a good weight, and it's exactly what I would expect to see in the industry at this point. You get 2 covers. As you can see, I got cover A, or excuse me, cover B. You got cover A on the back, I believe. Or no, that's not cover A. That it's similar to cover A, but not quite. But yes, very great art. The interior and exterior art is the same, which I appreciate. I prefer to have the same artist on the cover as well as the interiors. Yeah, a great product. It came very well packaged. Rippa did not use a Gemini mailer. He used something that looks like it's a step up. Probably manufactured by a local company. It's got his logo on it. I actually didn't save it, but it is a really nice mailer and has the potential to hold more than just 1 or 2 comics. So in days to come, you will be able to get multiple comics if you are catching up on this series in a single mailer. So good stuff there. As usual, I didn't get any of the tchotchkes or add-ons or t-shirts or stuff like that. I just got the base product, and it is a very good value for the money in terms of its physical qualities and in terms of its artwork. I think the artwork here is very good. I have some issues with it. And I will talk about those more in depth when we get to the critique part of this video. For now, just know that I think that while the artist is very good at these dramatic action poses, he's not always the best at linking them together. There were a couple of times in fight scenes where I was not sure what had happened or how we got from one panel to the next. That's not ideal. He's also not the best at expressions. People generally just look very serious, again, with 1 or 2 exceptions. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a neutral experience in most panels. But there are some places where I think more intense emotion on the characters' faces would have been helpful. I think that Cliff Richards, who is the artist on this book, he has an excellent command of the human form and of basic scene composition, but he could use some work on his acting. For lack of a better way to put it. People have very dynamic poses when they're in motion, but their general posture and attitude does not say a whole lot about their emotional state outside of action scenes or the build-up to action scenes. There are some exceptions to that. but I think we could use it a little bit more. One good exception to that, where I do think we get a good amount of that is actually here on this interior page, where we see Avery with his niece. That is a very good shot that gives us an idea of what everyone is thinking and what their emotional state is. But all in all, I think that could use some work. It could be better, is all I'm saying. I think it's one of the weaker parts of the art in this book. Story-wise, this is the story about Avery, a man who is left the big city to find his own way. He's bought a ranch. He's worked to better himself and his community. He's done that for reasons we don't learn in this story. And but he seems to have at one time been a costume superhero. He doesn't want to get back into that game, but he does have to go back into that game because he owes it to his family and his community. I think that's a pretty good book for a hero starting out. It gives us a lot of reasons to root for this guy, even though he is not a perfect paragon the whole time. Avery has something of an ego. He can be a little impulsive, and while he is very dedicated to his family, when he takes something personally, it can override some of his better judgment. We see all that pretty clearly in this book, which is pretty impressive for a 90-page book, I believe. 96-page book is the length. There's not all of that is Avery's story. There is a backup story in this. But for the most part, we get a decent introduction to the world, to Avery, and to his goals, at least for the moment. Writing-wise, those are important goals, and they're well accomplished in this. I think that there are some shortcomings in the way dialogue is written. I feel like the story does not develop as naturally or as quickly as it could. I'm going to expand more on that during the critique part. But I think that, yes, this story could use a little more forward momentum to it. Eric July, the author, of course, and publisher of Isom, is very interested in the world he's building, and he certainly seems to know these characters. But the story that he's trying to tell could be better presented, I think, given more forward momentum and really grab the reader better. The comic book is a format that does not have a whole lot of space to it. It doesn't have a whole lot of time to it. And so your pacing and the effectiveness with which you advance your story is very important. And I would say it's about 60 to 70% in this book. That is only one element of storytelling, and that's not a terrible grade. I guess 60% is technically a failing grade. But once you balance it against everything the story does right, I would give this 75, maybe 80 out of 100. It's a decent book, and at the price that July is offering it, it is well worth the cost if you are looking to get into a very big story that unfolds gradually over time. Which brings us to the business angle to this. Now, normally, I wouldn't talk too much about this during a review, but because this is going to be a very long story, because it's going to evolve over time, and because those facts are told to you here in the back, I think it's hard not to talk about this during the review portion. So I guess before we should do that, a quick word about the B-side, or the backup story, I believe, as it is called in American comics. There is a secondary story that's about 8 or 9 pages here, maybe 10. By the way, this is another chance for me to plug page numbers in your comic book. They're very helpful. The backup story features a metal band, it looks like, from the way they're dressed and the way their crowd behaves. There's a mosh pit, people throwing the horns, and I believe July is in a metal band. I could be wrong. Either that or he's a rapper. Maybe he's both. I'm not actually very familiar with Eric July's career outside of the Rippaverse. So the band here turns out to be the entire point of the set. Well, they turn out to have a secret. Let's just leave it at that because we're not into spoiler territory yet. And that's pretty much what the backup story serves to illustrate. And I think that's really the whole problem. We could have shown the backup band doing something um, with their secret. Instead, we see them being a band. And I think that is the whole problem with the pacing in this. We could see people doing what they do to the maximum in this story, and instead we see them building up to the maximum. And this is a two-parter. We're advised of that when we open the book, and it says Ill-Advised Part 1 is the title of this volume. So we understand that it is a two-parter. But again, I think some people will enjoy that pacing, and some people will not. Now, July is all about building a continuity. His podcast, I understand, is called For Canon's Sake. He is going to have a definitive canon to this story. He is promised not to retcon it. So you can invest in this and believe that what you are investing in will continue to pay off over time. I think all in all, if that's what appeals to you, this is a good product for you. If you like these really slow world-building stories that unfold gradually over the course of years, and if you're okay with waiting until the second volume to get the completion of a story, then Isom is worth checking out. However, that brings us again back to the business model. July has promised that he will be doing these campaigns fairly regularly, and so far, we only have one data point to go off of. Now, he did very well with Isom number 1. In spite of the fact that he got way more orders than anyone was really anticipating, I still got the book within a month of the time I was promised it. And if you are at all familiar with indie comics, you know that's not bad as far as timing goes. The problem is how consistently can he put them out. If he can manage to be as consistent as, say, the Common America team in putting out titles and do 4 or maybe even 5 a year, then I think he's going to be very successful because the story will continue to unfold at a decent clip. Again, this is a 90-page book, so if you get one of these every 3 months, you are getting as much story, in fact, more story, than you would get from a Big 2 comic that publishes 20 pages a month, give or take. So that is a reasonable storytelling pace. The question is whether you are going to be okay with the rate that July is delivering the story. So the other question is, how long can July sustain this? Obviously, he had some economics of scale issues going into this one. We're not sure yet whether he can sort them out going forward. We're not sure whether his artist can keep up with this level of demand going forward, or if he'll have multiple artists. If he has multiple artists, will the stylistic nature of the story suffer? We don't know yet. I do have a hard time with artists changing in the middle of a story run. So there are still a lot of question marks here. And of course, one of the things that amused me that I do know that Eric July is supposed to be a libertarian, and yet when people when it came time to ship out Isom to people who had backed it, he waited until he had enough supply to fulfill all his orders rather than give someone a first mover advantage with his limited supply that he had in hand, which struck me as a little curious. Libertarians are supposed to be okay with people getting those kinds of advantages, but I am also aware that there is an aspect of the collector's market at play here. Maybe that's what Eric was playing to. He knows his base better than I do. So all in all, there are a lot of questions on the business side of things going into this. And if you are on the fence based on what I've said so far, wait until Isom number 2 is definitively available before you buy. That is my recommendation as a reviewer. You will be more likely to get a story that is complete and satisfies you. Now, if you just want to get in on the ground floor and really dig into this ever-expanding comic universe and that really fires you up, I think Isom number 1 is a no-brainer. This is clearly written by someone who loves the American style of comics and just wants to pay homage to that style of storytelling with his own characters. And yeah, if you are one of those people as well, get this book. It is for you. I don't know, is it so much for me? I did enjoy reading it, but as I said, I was a little frustrated with it. I'm going to get Isom number 2 before I pass judgment on this. But yeah, I don't know. The Rippaverse may not be something that I continue with past the second volume. We just have to see what the payoffs are like. And unfortunately, we don't get the payoffs in this volume, and that I think is the strongest mark against it. So for now, I'm giving Isom number 1 the recommendation to buy it only if you are a hardcore comics fan that wants something that's actually of a decent quality as opposed to what you're mostly getting from the big two right now. That's my review. We move on to the critique and the spoiler talk. So if you don't want the story spoiled for you, dip out now. Let's talk a little bit more about the art and some of my issues with it. The first one is, as I said before, some of these panels don't seem to flow. Early on, we have a fight scene between Yaira and Alpha Squad, two groups of characters who are not developed pretty much any more than what we see of them here. But right now we're just talking about art, so let's have a look at the art real quick. So here we see a fist fight between Yaira and one of the members of Alpha Squad. She blasts them in the back with an energy bolt. Then we have this odd mix of panels here. And we see the person who got blasted kind of falling behind Yaira's head. Then she gets caught down below by another member of Alpha Squad. And we don't see Yaira at all. And I'm not sure whether this panel here is like metaphorical and we just have these two things in the same frame. I don't really know what happened there. Because if she is actually in this position relative to Yaira, Yaira should also be in this panel and she's not. So there's a lot of little things like that in action scenes throughout the course of the book that I kind of raised my eyebrow at. That is the biggest one, and it's not a huge inconsistency, but it did make me stop reading for about 5 seconds as I flipped the pages back and forth and tried to figure out what was going on. That's bad. That is not great visual storytelling. That said, it's not a huge issue either, and it's only in a couple of places. I think a bigger issue is what I said before about expressions. And again, I have an example right here in the first couple of pages. We see these two characters, Avery and his rival, whose name escapes me at the moment. But they are squaring off, they're staring down, and it looks like two guys with very neutral expressions, just shot a little bit from below. I would have liked to see some metaphor for the intensity we're supposed to feel here. Maybe that's just me. I have more of a cartoonish sense of the expressions here. I would have, if this was me illustrating, I would have shaded and hatched those faces much more heavily, or perhaps put in a colored background to show the intensity. Put something in the background. You could even put a metaphorical background in place. You could have everything from waves crashing or the static lightning bolt, something very cliche, to just, simmering fires in the background to show that, there is something stoking here, but it hasn't erupted into flame yet. All in all, as I said before, the art is not bad. I just would have liked to see some slightly stronger work in the paneling of fight scenes and in the showing of characters' expressions. And that's really all I have to say about the artwork. Cliff Richards is a very good artist. He did a great job in this book. And hopefully he takes that feedback as just a suggestion for a couple of areas he could put a little more work into to improve his storytelling, rather than a sign that I think he's bad. Because I don't. I think he's great. I just think he's a little work in a couple places. We all could. Let's talk a bit more about the writing. First of all, I understand that Eric is building a universe here. I think he throws a few too many names and locations and things at us at once. Specifically, what I would have taken out is I would have taken out Alpha Core. Yeah, I think I said Alpha Squad before. That was incorrect. Alpha Core, excuse me. I think it's okay to have Yaira in there. Obviously, if you take out Alpha Core, she primarily shows up fighting with them. So if you take Alpha Core out, you have to do something else with her. Um, I recognize that, just by suggesting maybe you don't need them in there, you completely upend part of the story. And there's only so much you can do with that. Point being, I think there are too many world building details in here at one time. And I think that especially since we have the, what's it called? Norfolka? Yeah, Norfolka, which is the metal band at the end. I think introducing two super teams that we get almost no information on is kind of a downside. And beyond that, we have most of the story revolves around Avery trying to rescue a girl from a club that has a lot of shady connections. People are worried she could be being prostituted from there, or even being used as a drug mule. A lot of unsavory stuff could be happening in this club. And at one point, we see two people in the club talking to each other about using the club as a hub of operations. And we see one of the people there with glowing green eyes. And I could not tell if that was supposed to be a cue that that person was a member of Alpha Flight. He was with a woman with dark hair, very shapely. All the women in this are shapely, which is nice. But very shapely. So I thought, oh, maybe it's this Alpha Core lady and this guy, or maybe even the guy in the helmet. They're green themed. The guy had glowing green eyes. That kind of color coding is very important in comics. So I just connected them, but I never became clear to me whether they were actually the same people or not. Which makes sense. If they're at the club, they're probably undercover. And furthermore, I would expect a lot of people to look different in their suits than they do in civilian life. So yeah, and if they're not members of Alpha Core, then we have three organizations introduced to us in this book that we then learn nothing about. That's too much. I don't know as I'm necessarily going to remember any of them when they come up again. I'm most likely to remember Norfolka because we actually get to experience a little bit of the story from their point of view, even though it's pretty much a teaser, a setup. It doesn't deliver anything in this installment. And Alpha Core is kind of interesting because they are part of a major fight scene, even if we don't learn a whole lot about their personalities outside of how they fight. So these characters in the club, their inclusion is weird to me, as is the inclusion of so many factions. Again, if I had control of this, I would have just had Norfolka and the criminal club be the other elements of the super world that are included in here. Let's talk about some of the dialogue. Dialogue in here is generally very good. Characters have intelligible dialogue for the most part, and they actually talk to each other about issues rather than saying like pre-recorded sound bites, which seems to be a lot of dialogue writing these days. So they have actual discussions. That's good. You have a sense of characters. Avery and his sister, for example, speak in very different ways. And between that and where they live and the ways they dress, tell me that Avery is probably a guy who graduated from high school and went straight into the hero gig, whereas his sister seems to have gone to college, perhaps even gotten post-secondary education. Might have a master's or a doctorate. She seems very well educated and very well connected politically. Nobody says that right out. We can infer it, however, from the dialogue and the way people dress and the way people act. That is very good writing. We do have some bad writing in here. In particular, there is a scene where Avery is reconnecting with a guy he knew in high school, and there is a moment where I just don't know what the people are talking about. So Avery's friend, and I'll try and get his name here real quick, because I don't remember it now. I just think him as the owner, because that's his role in the story so far. Darren, okay. So Darren he is talking to Avery, and he says, "We were cool, but I didn't admire you. You had both of your parents around, a good household, and somehow you managed to amount to nothing." What this tells us, and what one of the things I like about dialogue in here, is that we learn here that secret identities do exist for most, or at least some supers in this universe, because Avery became a superhero, and most of his friends don't know what he was doing in that time period. So very good there. But Darren continues saying, "You just faded into the shadows, rarely heard from, set up for success, and you did nothing with it. When people like me go away like that, we're usually dead or in jail, yet I built myself an empire." I don't know what happened in that dialogue. Darren is talking about Avery going away and disappearing off the radar because that's what he did, apparently. And then suddenly the conversation pivots to being about Darren. And I don't know, I can't draw the connection between those two speech bubbles. And again, this is not common. In fact, this is the only time it happens. But it took me out of the story for several seconds. I had to reread these panels 3 times, and I couldn't make the connection out. I still can't make the connection out. I don't know what the thread we're following there is. Another paragraph would have helped me draw that line. I just don't get what Darren's going on about. I think it says something important about him, but since I can't figure out what he's saying, it doesn't illuminate his character to me. It just leaves me confused. That was disappointing. Finally, I have harped on the pacing in this book already. And as I said before, we get a lot of extraneous world information. We get a lot of talk about super teams in it. And we have a sequence of, let's see here, 5 pages, right? 1, 2, 4, yeah, 5 pages, where Avery goes to get a super suit. Now, I understand that The Incredibles had Edna Mode. That was funny, and it poked a little bit of fun at the genre. I know that unstable molecules have always been a thing in Marvel Comics. I don't understand the fascination with super suits. At least, I understand the importance of like the character design and having something cool for people to look at when they're on the page. Like, I understand the reason for these. I don't understand the reason for giving these backstory. That was something that kind of annoyed me, because we could have been spending that time expanding on the story and not introducing a secret lab where super suits are made, and essentially introducing another faction that we're going to have to think about at least a little bit as the story goes forward. So I have many gripes there. There are a lot of things that I like. I like the meet cute between Avery and Yaira. I don't know as that's going anywhere, but it is a great example of how you can have 2 superheroes not understand each other and have a bad run with each other without making anyone look like a villain. I understand. Oh, here we are. I found the people in the club that I was talking about earlier, now that I don't want them. My point is, Eric manages to have 2 superheroes fight each other, and they are clearly both superheroes. He managed to have them fight each other in a way that makes us interested in both of their stories, rather than set against them in any way. We want to see them talk this out and work out their differences, which doesn't happen in this book, unfortunately. But we want to see the misunderstanding worked out and see how these characters will work together in the future, rather than finding one of the characters to just be a jerk who should get lost and not be published again, which is generally how I feel about many of these moments in modern comic books. Real top props to the writing of Avery's sister, and her name escapes me as well. Let's see. Get it when she first calls him. Altana. Not sure what the importance of that name is. But Altana is Avery's sister. She works at a place called Projexis, in the Projexis headquarters. Again, we get a lot of signs that she is well educated, well connected, mover and shaker. And she has the kind of no nonsense attitude I would expect from a person like that. But she also cares a lot about Avery. When she realizes she's asked him to look into something much bigger than she expected, she tries to pull him back out. I like the dialogue between them. I like the way that Altana tries to hold their mother over Avery. Avery says, "I'm the older one." They have a very believable brother-sister dynamic, I think. So props there. I like the relationship between Avery and his niece. It's a very real moment. It's fun. It shows Avery's softer side. It gives us a sense of the family that Avery works for, the people that he appreciates and cares about. If Altana and her daughter were not in this story, we would have almost no sense of who Avery is in his personal life. We see some of the people who work for him on the farm, but other than that, we don't really see personal side of Avery in this book. But that small inclusion does a great deal to humanize Avery, and is a very important part of the writing of this book. Good stuff. So all in all, it's a mixed bag, and I think I would have cut some stuff. I would have reworked some stuff on both the art and the dialogue side to make the story more intelligible and flow better. But Isom #1 is a serviceable story. The big thing I would recommend to Eric, he has 2 people in here credited as copy editors. A copy editor goes through and fixes your grammar and your spelling mistakes and your punctuation mistakes, and he makes sure that what you meant to say comes through. He doesn't credit a story editor, and I think he could really use one. It would definitely fix up some of those pacing issues, having somebody to run all of this past in total and make those kind of recommendations. I think probably would have advised him to clean up some of these hanging threads, not all of them, but some, and focus more on the story he's telling and setting up in this book. So my big recommendation to Eric is find a copy editor, or not a copy editor, find a story editor. If you can't find one, at the very least, run this by some really experienced writers that you know. I know Eric has worked with Chris Gore in the past. Maybe he could get him to help him workshop the scripts. Somebody, Chad Brooks, another guy who has a good sense for storytelling, to really help you ratchet in on the important ideas that make the story click and determine how much of the world building and side elements you can include without bogging the story down. You're in a decent spot right now, Eric, but it could always be better. And I know that it is hard to find somebody who will dedicate the time to be a story editor for you. And it's kind of risky, or at least it can feel kind of risky, putting your story out before you're ready to share it with the world. But that is what editors are for. If you can't find one, 2 people I would recommend. Michael Kritzer, aka Professor Geek on YouTube. He is a longtime comic books reader, and he is a longtime creative writer. He has published short fiction, he has published comic books, and he is a big advocate of archetypes. I think he could really help you with the editing and the trimming down a little bit of that excess fat that's in this story. Another recommendation, because I know that Michael Kritzer is a very busy man. He's a professor, so he also teaches, and he can't always take on a whole lot of contract work. But another person you would consider is Kat Rocha, who is the editor-in-chief of 01 Publishing. She has a long history in the publishing industry. She's edited comic books, she's edited short fiction anthologies, and she has edited novels. So I think, she has excellent credentials and very reasonable rates. I have worked with both of these people as editors in the past. They give good, clear feedback, and they give you plenty of time to discuss their feedback with them as well. So if you need someone, I would suggest looking into one of those 2, because I think a story editor would take this from a just above average comic book to a really good one. So those are my thoughts on Isom number 1. If you've read the story, let me know what you think down in the comments below, and share with me how you think Isom number 2 is going to play out. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. There's a like button and a subscribe button down below. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.